I often found myself wondering what intuition truly means, what people commonly refer to as a gut feeling or an inner sense. The term intuition is constantly being thrown around. Some people say they can sense when something is wrong, when something feels off or out of place, even though they frequently choose to ignore that feeling. Looking back now, I realize that my intuition was warning me that something wasn't right months before the wedding day. It was practically screaming at me that my fiancée, Holly, and my best friend, Keelan, were becoming far too close. Too close for it to be normal. But I was overwhelmed, completely consumed by my demanding job in software consulting, the endless stress of planning the wedding Holly so desperately wanted, and the constant pressure of trying to satisfy her extremely demanding parents, Richard and Marjorie Chambers. And although, from time to time, I felt something like a sharp stab of jealousy when I saw Holly and Keelan laughing together in a corner, or noticed the unsettling intensity with which Keelan looked at her, I simply didn't have the energy or the time to deal with those feelings. I was exhausted from endless 12-hour workdays, non-stop phone calls, and the constant stream of wedding-related tasks that never seemed to end. My parents, as loving as they are, neither had the financial means nor the experience to help meet the lavish expectations imposed by Holly and her mother. So I was left juggling dozens of responsibilities on my own, barely able to catch my breath. And yet, the warning signs were clearly there. One of the most obvious red flags was their constant texting, far more frequent than what would be normal between a bride-to-be and the groom's best friend. I would catch them laughing together over messages or referencing jokes they refused to share with me. If I asked, "What's so funny?" they would brush me off or give vague excuses. "It's just a stupid meme, it's an inside joke, you wouldn't get it," and so on. I had known Keelan since our freshman year of college. We lived together in a cramped dorm room, studied late into the night for exams, and had each other's backs during some really hard times. I considered us incredibly close, practically brothers. And maybe that was exactly why I tried to suppress my growing unease. I simply couldn't believe he was capable of betraying my trust like that. "He's my best man," I kept telling myself. "He's on my side, right?" Right. As for Holly, she came from a much wealthier family. The Chambers family was well known for their influence in the local community. Richard Chambers was deeply involved in politics, and Marjorie Chambers was a constant presence at social events, radiating status and importance wherever she went. When I proposed to Holly, her parents didn't exactly welcome me with open arms. They weren't openly hostile, but their looks always made it clear that I didn't measure up in their eyes. The Chambers name carried certain standards that, in their opinion, had to be maintained. Their arrogance became especially evident during the wedding planning. "We'll split the costs 50-50, they said, only to immediately insist on a luxurious venue, extravagant decorations, a string quartet, and an enormous guest list that eventually ballooned to nearly 300 people. My parents, my father, a schoolteacher, and my mother, a retired nurse, barely managed to scrape together enough money to cover their share. Whenever I tried to set boundaries, I was met with the same line from Marjorie Chambers: "We simply cannot afford to cut corners. We are the Chambers family." Or, "Think about what people will say. Do you really want your bride to look cheap on her big day?" It infuriated me. Still, Holly often sided with her parents, and I always heard the same response from her: "Just let them have their fun. We're only doing this once anyway, right?" Those words would later take on a much heavier meaning. A week before the wedding, Keelan smiled and offered to take care of booking hotel rooms for the guests. "You're already swamped, let me handle this," he said, showing me screenshots on his phone. It reminded me of our college days, when I trusted him with important things without hesitation. Relieved, I agreed. The night before the wedding, we gathered for the rehearsal dinner at the venue. Holly, wearing an almost bridal white dress, floated effortlessly among relatives, while my parents looked visibly uncomfortable amid all the lavish displays. Every so often, Keelan would flash me a thumbs up from across the room. After the rehearsal, we moved to the lounge area for an after-party. The mood was upbeat, but I noticed that Holly had disappeared. My calls went straight to voicemail. One of the bridesmaids casually said, "She just stepped outside to get some air." I shrugged. Maybe she really did need a moment to herself. But time passed, and then Keelan disappeared too. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe he'd gone to grab champagne or take care of something. But an insistent thought started forming in my mind. Why not go look for them? 30 minutes turned into an hour. Bored and uneasy, I decided to check social media. That's when I noticed a short Instagram story on Holly's account, one she deleted almost immediately. But it was already too late. In that short video, I recognized a familiar hotel hallway, the gold-patterned carpet, a partially visible room number. It was definitely not our wedding venue. A different place, a different hotel. My heart dropped. Every feeling I had been pushing aside suddenly became undeniable. The intuition I had ignored came rushing back at full force. I had to see it for myself. I needed to be absolutely certain, to witness it firsthand, without assumptions, excuses, or rationalizations. I vividly remember driving through the crowded streets near the hotel district. My mind was racing, offering one explanation after another. Maybe Holly had gone to a friend's room. Maybe Keelan was just helping her pick something up. My heart was pounding, and the thought, what if they're actually together, caused a physical ache in my chest. It felt absurd, impossible. But the part of me that had finally awakened after months of ignoring the warning signs refused to be silenced. I knew that Keelan had recently been handling hotel bookings for several guests, though I couldn't recall the specifics. So I parked my car, walked into the lobby of one of the upscale boutique hotels, and tried to gauge whether the front desk staff might recognize me, perhaps from earlier visits or from the group reservations Keelan had arranged. The plan was half-baked and poorly thought out. But fate intervened in another way. I spotted Keelan's car parked right out front. If that wasn't a sign, I didn't know what was. I took the elevator up to the 8th floor. My eyes scanned the row of doors as I tried to remember the room number I had glimpsed in that Instagram story. 846, 847. My pulse quickened, each step echoing through the nearly silent hallway. Outside the windows, the night was thick and pitch black, like tar. The overhead lighting felt harsh, almost as if it were deliberately exposing me before I was ready to face what lay ahead. I wasn't looking for a confrontation, not yet. Something deep inside me demanded facts, undeniable proof, evidence so clear that I would never again be able to tell myself this was all in my head. I cautiously approached the door to room 847 and pressed my ear against it. At first, silence. My heart was beating so loudly I was afraid it might give me away. I slowly tested the handle, and a cold shock ran through me. The door wasn't latched from the inside. It had only been locked electronically, left vulnerable to carelessness. The irony was that Keelan himself had given me the master keycard weeks earlier. He'd explained it as a precaution in case of wedding-related complications. Just in case there are issues with the guests' rooms, he had said. I pulled the card from my pocket, slid it into the reader, and a second later the small indicator light turned green. The lock clicked softly. A single thought flashed through my mind. They gave me the very tool that would expose them. My stomach twisted. I slipped inside almost silently. The lighting was dim, casting soft shadows across the room. I heard hushed, intimate whispers, and my blood began to boil. On the king-sized bed, Holly was there with Keelan. Bare skin, her hair disheveled, the sheets rumpled. She was lying on her side, with Keelan hovering over her. They were speaking quietly. I couldn't make out the words, but her laughter said more than any explanation ever could. That was enough. The anger hit instantly. I clenched my fists so tightly my nails dug into my palms. I wanted to shout, to yank Keelan off the bed, to hit him for even daring to betray me. But somewhere deep inside, a cold, steady voice cut through everything. Stop. Don't give them a reaction. Get proof. I remembered that there were less than 12 hours left before the wedding. I wanted them to stand beside me at the altar, convinced that I knew nothing. I wanted to publicly shatter their perfect image. Let them believe they'd gotten away with it. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone and switched it to video mode. I aimed the camera, zoomed in. My finger hovered over the record button. Yes, I told myself. You're going to want them to see this later. I recorded several seconds, capturing everything: Holly's face, Keelan's posture, the timestamp in the corner of the screen. They had no idea I was there. Keelan whispered something about how, "We'll never get caught," followed by Holly's quiet laugh. The camera picked up every word. Clearly, indisputably. My entire body trembled with rage. I forced myself to stay silent. No scene. Not yet. I repeated it over and over, clinging to that thought like a lifeline. Once I decided I had enough footage, I slowly backed away, keeping the recording going so the microphone would capture every humiliating detail. I closed the door as carefully as I had opened it. Then I practically ran down the hallway toward the elevator. It felt as though a bomb had been strapped to my chest, one that would explode the very next day. The night air outside hit me like ice-cold water. My heart was pounding as if I'd just run a marathon. Waves of anger crashed over me, each one threatening to break into a scream or complete collapse. I gripped my phone in my sweaty hand, the proof that the people I trusted most had betrayed me. I stood there for several minutes, trying to catch my breath. Then I got into my car and drove aimlessly until I stumbled across a 24-hour diner. In a worn-out booth, I watched the footage alone. There was no longer any doubt. It was at that moment that a hard, unforgiving plan began to take shape. They wanted to humiliate me, and they had succeeded. But tomorrow, I would not be the only one feeling shame. That night, sleep eluded me entirely. By 5 a.m, I had downed 3 cups of coffee, scribbled notes for the wedding presentation, and run through in my head how to adjust the event's timing to have full control over the microphone and projector. The venue was equipped with a modern audiovisual system, perfect for the slideshow of childhood photos and key moments from our relationship. I already knew exactly which images would appear: Holly's childhood pictures, my awkward teenage snapshots, our beach photos together. And I knew with certainty that everything could be replaced in seconds. I understood the system thoroughly. A flash drive, my phone, any external source, and the broadcast would be exactly as I wanted it. Part of me still hesitated. The thought of publicly displaying an intensely private, intimate moment gnawed at me. But then, over and over, I returned to the reality of what they had done behind my back, on the night before our wedding. The cruelty and cynicism of their betrayal, in my mind, justified the radical measures I was planning. Every action carries consequences. At 6:30 a.m., I returned to our apartment, the one Holly and I had shared for nearly a year. Her absence didn't surprise me. If she thought I suspected nothing, she had probably planned to slip in at dawn, quietly enter the guest room, and pretend she had just stayed over after a girls' night. But when I entered, the apartment looked exactly as we had left it the night before. The living room was dark, the bedroom neat, without a trace of haste. I went into the bedroom that had once felt cozy and familiar. Now it seemed like foreign territory. Her phone charger lay on the nightstand. On the dresser sat the box containing the ring I had given her. My heart clenched with pain, immediately followed by a surge of anger. She had erased everything we had built together for a fleeting connection with my best friend. I put my phone on silent and tried to lie down for at least an hour or two. Sleep didn't come. My thoughts kept spinning uncontrollably. Around 9 a.m., Holly finally returned. I heard the familiar sound of the door unlocking. Remaining still, I pretended to sleep, wanting to see if she would tiptoe around. She did. Her steps were cautious, as if afraid to wake me or face questions about where she had been all night. She didn't even glance into our bedroom. I heard her quickly slip into the guest room, probably to freshen up and cover her tracks. Half an hour later, I emerged, feigning a sleepy yawn as if the night had passed uneventfully. Holly sat at the kitchen island, her hair neatly brushed, wearing a plain t-shirt and sweatpants. Seeing me, she offered a tired smile. "Good morning, darling," she said. "I stayed at a friend's place. Too much wine after the rehearsal dinner. You know how it goes." I smiled back, though my mind kept replaying the footage from last night. "Looks like the party was a success," I said calmly. "Glad you're okay." I quickly kissed her on the cheek, holding back every sarcastic comment clawing its way to the surface. Relief flashed in her eyes. Perhaps even a trace of wariness. I realized clearly. She was trying to gauge whether I suspected anything. But my expression remained calm, almost tender. I wanted her to believe she had gotten away with it. That performance would need to continue for several more hours. The wedding was scheduled for noon at the prestigious Wentworth Estate, a venue chosen for status and impression. My parents arrived around 10 in the morning, moved and excited, unaware of the storm brewing behind the scenes. I greeted them with restrained hugs. My mother shone in a light pastel dress. My father patted me on the back, as if remembering the quiet boy I once was. With a tight smile, I explained that I needed to check the audiovisual equipment urgently. "I'll see you shortly," I said, and walked away. Holly, along with the bridesmaids, was bustling in her suite, getting hair and makeup done. Keelan was most likely in the groomsmen's room. I had no intention of looking for him. Let him continue to believe I knew nothing. I slipped quietly into the AV control booth overlooking the ballroom. Technician Tony was checking the microphone and projector. "This is the groom, Daniel," he said to his colleague. "He has some extra material he wants to show, right?" "Yes," I confirmed, barely smiling. I pulled a flash drive from the inner pocket of my jacket. "I have a little surprise video. Instead of the standard couple slideshow, I want something a bit more dramatic." Tony smiled. "It's your day, man. Just tell me when to swap the files." I clenched the flash drive in my fingers. "I'll give the signal. I'll say something like, go. Trust me, you'll notice it." A fleeting twinge of guilt hit me for a moment, but I crushed it quickly. They had made their choice. The ceremony was scheduled to begin precisely at noon in the grand ballroom, a vast space with high ceilings, crystal chandeliers, and rows of perfectly arranged chairs. By 11:50, the room was nearly full. Guests chatted animatedly, took photos, exchanged compliments. The bride's side was large, mostly members of the Chambers family's social circle. Local officials, business partners, distant relatives. My side, friends, colleagues, close ones, looked modest, lost among the sea of Chambers. According to the plan, I was supposed to wait by the altar next to the usher until the procession began. But at 11:55, I wasn't there. The usher, a longtime acquaintance of Richard Chambers, looked around nervously. Richard started checking his watch impatiently. My mother fidgeted anxiously in her seat. Marjorie Chambers, in a flawless lavender suit, frowned and leaned toward the guests nearby. "Where the hell is Daniel? Is he always this unreliable?" she hissed, taking the opportunity to tarnish my reputation. Holly, waiting backstage, was probably starting to panic, but I couldn't see it. I was observing everything from the balcony on the second floor, hidden behind curtains, scanning the crowd and feeling the tension slowly, but surely, building. When the clock hands passed 12:01, the doors were supposed to open for the wedding procession. Instead, an awkward silence settled over the room, quickly turning into a low murmur of confusion. Exactly as planned, the moment had come to drop the bomb. I slipped back into the AV booth. Tony was pacing nervously at the control panel, glancing repeatedly at the timer. Seeing me, he immediately spoke up. "Hey, man, we're already 2 minutes behind." "You okay?" "Absolutely," I replied with a tight smile, stepping up to the microphone connected to the overhead speakers. My heart pounded as if trying to burst out of my chest, but anger and adrenaline kept me focused. "Let's begin." I switched on the microphone. My voice echoed through the massive ballroom. "Good afternoon, everyone." Instantly, the room fell silent. A wave of stillness washed over the seated guests. They looked around, trying to locate me, expecting to see me by the altar. But there was no one there. Surprise quickly gave way to confusion. Richard Chambers stood up from his seat, scanning the room. Marjorie pressed a hand to her chest. "Hello?" the usher called out uncertainly. "I want to thank you all for being here today," I continued through the speakers, keeping my tone calm, though everything inside me was boiling. "Before the ceremony begins, we're going to make a slight change in plans. Actually, there will be no ceremony." The room erupted with astonished gasps. Guests whispered, craned their necks, some stood, trying to find me with their eyes. Someone moved toward the sound system. Holly, hidden in the bridal suite, was probably losing her mind by now. Tony looked at me with wide eyes. I gave a brief nod, the signal to start. He fumbled, inserted my flash drive, and froze, waiting. Before everyone completely loses it, I continued, my voice reverberating off the walls, "I want to show you something. A short video. Tony, play it." On the large projection screen, which had been showing light-hearted clips of our happy past just a moment ago, the image disappeared. The screen went black. A second later, grainy but unmistakable footage appeared. The very same footage I had shot less than 12 hours earlier. Holly and Kylan, tangled in sheets. Voices were audible. A clear timestamp in the lower corner. I had edited the clip just enough to highlight the moment when Kylan's face turned toward the camera, unaware of my presence. I zoomed in so that the clock behind them was clearly readable. Undoubtedly, the night before this very wedding. The room exploded into screams. Then came a heavy, stunned silence, instantly replaced by a thunder of outraged whispers. Some froze with hands over their mouths. An elderly relative shouted loudly, Oh my God. Richard Chambers, standing, nearly toppled over his chair. Marjorie's face twisted as if she'd just swallowed acid. Kylan, somewhere among the groomsmen, probably heard the emotional explosion and realized what had happened. But it was too late. Even from the booth, I could hear panicked footsteps, shouting, hysterical screams. The usher stared at the screen as if he had lost the ability to move. One of the bridesmaids began crying out loud. A voice somewhere shouted, "Someone, turn it off." I let the video play for a full 10 seconds. That was enough for everyone to see the timestamp, recognize the faces, understand that on the screen were my fiancé and my best friend. Then I stopped the playback. The screen went black again, but the chaos only intensified. The room was boiling with emotion. Tony's face went as white as chalk. "What the hell, man?" he whispered. I said nothing and stepped away from the microphone. Down below, I saw Holly. She appeared at the entrance to the ballroom in her wedding dress. Her hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless, but the horror on her face was impossible to hide. "Turn it off," she screamed, her voice pure desperation. It looked like she had missed a few seconds of the video itself, but the guests' reactions told her more than any footage ever could. Marjorie lunged toward the projector, waving her arms and pointing fingers at the staff. "Who let this happen?" she spat. Tony, hunched over in the booth, didn't even have a chance to respond. Richard Chambers stormed into the central aisle, roaring like an enraged bull. "Daniel! Where is Daniel?" He spun in place, his face blotchy red. Guests parted, unsure whether to stay or run. My mother was crying. My father stood beside her, protective, casting heavy glares at the Chambers family, trying to process what they were seeing. Some of Holly's relatives turned away, frightened that the scandal would taint them too. A woman in the second row fainted. Her neighbor shook her shoulder, shouting for water. Total, uncontrollable chaos. Holly frantically searched the room for me with her eyes, her gown's train trailing behind her like a ghost. Finally, her eyes found me on the second-floor balcony. I stepped forward, leaning on the railing. The entire room, as if on cue, turned toward me, staring as though I were the host of some macabre show. "What are you doing?" Holly screamed, her voice cracking with rage. "You weren't supposed to see me before the wedding, you coward." A strange complaint given the circumstances. I felt a twisted, cold satisfaction in the fact that even in complete collapse, she clung to a superstitious tradition. That the groom must not see the bride before the ceremony. "The wedding will not happen," I said, deliberately letting the words echo through the room. "You took care of that yourself last night." She froze. Tears glistened in her eyes, her lips trembling. "Daniel, please, let's just talk. Not like this. Not in front of everyone." "And why not?" I snapped. "You didn't hesitate when you cheated on me with my best friend. I think all these people, who spent money, time, and effort to come here, have the right to know the real reason the ceremony was cancelled." Her mother, flushed with fury, thrust a hand toward me, pointing a finger. "You've humiliated the Chambers name in front of all these influential people. Do you even realize what kind of disgrace this is for our family?" I laughed, short, sharp, bitter, almost like a bark. Disgrace? I was disgraced by Holly and Kylan. I merely returned the favor. A new movement rippled through the front of the room. Kylan appeared. His tuxedo was half-buttoned, his hair disheveled, his face twisted in panic. "Daniel, let's talk," he started, trying to step closer. I charged down the stairs to the center of the room, determined to confront him face to face. Holly threw herself in my path, trying to stop me. Her voluminous white dress only hindered her. I shoved both of them roughly aside. My stomach churned with rage. My fists clenched so tight my fingers throbbed. Kylan stammered, stumbling over his words. "Man, you don't understand." She was upset. I couldn't listen anymore. Flashbacks from my phone kept replaying in my mind, them in bed, mercilessly clear. Fury crashed over me in a wave, and I struck him across the face. The slap was loud, sharp, the sound slicing through the silence of the room. Kylan staggered and fell to the floor, groaning in pain. The crowd gasped in unison. "Stop," Holly yelled. "You're hurting him." She dropped to her knees beside Kylan, ignoring how her dress crumpled and spread around her. Marjorie let out a strangled scream. "You monster. Attacking him right here, in front of everyone?" I pointed at Kylan, struggling to get up. "The monsters are him and your daughter. They betrayed me behind my back, made a fool of me right under my nose. Now, at least everyone can see who they really are. A heavy, tense silence enveloped the room. Holly stared at me, tears streaming down her cheeks without pause. Daniel, I'm sorry. Okay? Just stop. I turned to the guests. Many already had their phones ready, recording every second of this chaos. Thank you all for coming, I said, with cold, almost ceremonial politeness. But there will be no wedding today. I apologize if you were expecting a beautiful ceremony. Instead, you've witnessed the truth. Then I spun sharply and exited the room, slipping through the heavy double doors. My parents followed, shocked but determined. I heard Holly call my name, but I didn't look back. I drove back to our apartment, adrenaline still thrumming through my veins. My mother came with me. She was stunned, eyes brimming with tears. Daniel, are you sure? Was this all real? She asked quietly when we arrived. I nodded silently and showed her the original, unedited video with the timestamp from the night before the wedding. Her face went pale. My God, she whispered, embracing me. I'm so sorry. My father stood behind, hesitating, searching for words. You did what you had to do, son, he finally said, patting me on the shoulder. I could see the pain in his eyes. We lost a lot of money because of this wedding, but better to lose that than to watch you live in a lie. I thanked them both and asked them to go home and get some rest. They left, reassuring me again and again of their unconditional support. Despite everything, a sense of guilt gnawed at me over the sheer scale and public nature of the disaster. My parents had been forced to witness that humiliating spectacle after all the sacrifices they had made. But I saw no other way. Quietly canceling the wedding would not have brought any relief. I needed the truth brought into the open. Once I was alone, I began removing Holly's belongings from the apartment. That same night, I pulled boxes out of the closet and started packing all of her clothes, her many pairs of shoes, her makeup, and the small decorative items she had insisted on keeping around. I packed everything carefully, labeling each box with a black marker. Then I rented a small U-Haul trailer online, loaded it around midnight, and drove to her parents' estate. It was a massive house in a gated, guarded community, a true monument to the Chambers family's inflated sense of self-importance. The security guard at the gate recognized me from previous visits and, noticing the truck, asked cautiously, "Everything okay, Mr. Harper?" "Just dropping off Holly's things," I replied evenly. He silently opened the gate. I parked by the front entrance, beneath the massive portico. Stone columns and wide mahogany doors loomed over me, as if silently passing judgment. The anger still smoldered inside me, but a strange calm was slowly washing over it. The adrenaline had faded, and the finality of my decision was beginning to feel real. I carefully set the boxes on the doorstep, knocked once with the brass knocker, and returned to the truck. As I drove away, I saw lights come on inside the house. Most likely Richard or Marjorie was heading to see who had dared disturb them at 1 in the morning. Let them find their precious daughter's belongings. She could move back into her old bedroom. I didn't care. The next morning, I was jolted awake by a furious, insistent pounding on my apartment door. For a brief, groggy moment, I thought it was just an echo of a nightmare. Then a very familiar voice cut through the door, Richard Chambers. "Open up, we know you're inside." I pulled on a t-shirt, walked over, and opened the door. In the hallway stood Holly, Richard, and Marjorie. All three radiated restrained but concentrated fury. Holly's eyes were swollen and red from crying and a sleepless night, her hair hanging messily over her shoulders. Richard, as always, looked immaculate in his custom-tailored suit, but this time his hands were clenched into fists. Marjorie wore an expensive coat and held a thick folder of documents. "We need to discuss compensation," Richard said coldly, skipping any greeting. I barely suppressed a tired laugh. "Compensation? For what, exactly?" Marjorie thrust the papers toward me. "For the wedding fiasco, obviously. We spent tens of thousands of dollars on that event. Guest accommodations, catering, non-refundable deposits. Everything went up in smoke because of your little performance." I skimmed the receipts and invoices. "Are you serious? You do realize your daughter cheated on me with Kylan the night before the wedding, right? They destroyed this, not me." Holly's face twisted with outrage. "You had no right to set a trap for me in front of all those people. If you didn't want to get married, you could have just cancelled quietly." "I had every right," I hissed, feeling the anger rise again from deep inside. You and Kylan made a fool of me. I simply returned the favor. Actions have consequences. Richard raised his voice. We paid for half the wedding. Your parents covered the other half, but the final costs exceeded what was originally agreed upon. We want our money back. You owe us, let's say $15,000. That's only part of our losses. I stared at him in open disbelief. You honestly think I owe you $15,000 for a wedding your daughter personally destroyed? Marjorie's lips pressed into a thin line. You staged that disgusting projector stunt. There were important people there, clients, donors, officials. You humiliated us in front of the very people who shape reputations. We won't let you walk away without consequences. I nearly laughed at the audacity. Let's not forget. None of this would have happened if Holly hadn't decided to cheat on the eve of the wedding. Holly flinched. You're a bastard. Maybe if you'd been around more, if you actually cared about my needs. I cut her off with a short, contemptuous snort. Oh, now it's my fault? You know what, get out. Both of you. I'm not paying you a single cent. Richard stepped forward, looming over me. Do you have any idea who you're talking to? I have serious influence in this city. I've heard that before, I replied calmly. But you seem to be forgetting something. I have the video. Your daughter's face. A clear timestamp. If you want to use your influence, go ahead. We'll just let public opinion see the unedited footage. I'm sure your donors and officials would find it very interesting. Then we can talk about humiliation. They froze. The fury on Richard's face hadn't disappeared, but he clearly hesitated. Holly tried a different approach. She stepped forward, looking at me with tearful eyes. Daniel, please, we once loved each other. We were building a life together. Don't destroy everything over one mistake. One? I asked, barely keeping the tremor from my voice. That wasn't an accident. You did this knowingly. I saw everything with my own eyes and recorded it. There's no turning back. Now leave. Richard's shoulders slumped. He realized he had no leverage here. Marjorie snorted with deliberate disdain. You'll regret this. I shrugged. Not nearly as much as you would have regretted me marrying your daughter. They left, slamming the door so hard the box inside rattled. I leaned my back against the wood as their footsteps faded. A wave of exhaustion washed over me, mixed with a bittersweet relief. It was truly over. No wedding, no bride, no best friend. A victory without joy, but a victory nonetheless. Word spread instantly. Friends texted, some offering support, others in shock or judgment. I retold the same story over and over. How I caught them and why I exposed everything at the wedding. Some called it cruel, some legendary. I simply ignored the criticism. Kylan sent only one message. Dude, I'm sorry, but you have to understand. I didn't reply. Later, he lost his job for dishonesty. Just as it should have been. My parents were exhausted. Upset about the lost money, but also relieved that I had avoided a disastrous marriage. My father comforted my mother, saying, better to lose money than Daniel's dignity. I promised them I would make it right. The Chambers tried to salvage their reputation, spreading stories about my supposedly uncontrollable jealousy. But the guests had seen everything for themselves. Their image was destroyed. Holly, humiliated, flitted among acquaintances, possibly even returning to Kylan. I didn't care. I moved into a cheaper apartment, threw myself into work, and slowly began rebuilding my life. The heartbreak didn't vanish immediately, but it was my anger that pushed me forward. Over time, the scandal faded. But I kept a copy of that hotel video. Just in case, if anyone ever tried to question what had really happened.